The sun was just beginning to dip low in the sky, casting a warm golden glow across the quiet highway that stretched for miles through the heart of Texas. It was late afternoon, and the road was calm, with only a few cars passing here and there. At the side of this long stretch, there was a small, old-fashioned gas station that had been serving travelers for decades. It was the kind of place where locals might stop to chat, and weary drivers could find a cold drink or a quick snack before getting back on the road. On this particular evening, the gas station stood silent, except for the hum of fuel pumps and the occasional beep of a cash register inside the convenience store. Two soldiers pulled into the gas station just as they had many times before during their training trips. Sergeant David Reyes and Specialist Mark Collins were off duty, but still wore their military uniforms, neat and well-maintained despite the long journey. They had been on the road for several hours, returning home after a rigorous training exercise at a nearby base. Their truck rumbled gently as it came to a stop beside one of the gas pumps. David got out first, stretching his tired legs, while Mark went inside to grab a couple of coffees from the small cafe inside the store. David was a tall, sturdy man in his early 30s, with short-cropped hair and sharp, attentive eyes that missed very little. Mark, a few years younger, had a friendly smile that made him easy to talk to. Both were known among their fellow soldiers for being calm under pressure and for their strong bond as teammates. Today they were relaxed, sharing jokes about the training drills and discussing plans for the weekend with their families. As Mark returned from the store carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee, a group of 4 bikers arrived at the gas station. They rode loud, intimidating motorcycles that thundered as they pulled up, drawing immediate attention from everyone nearby. The bikers wore black leather jackets covered with patches, some of which displayed the logo of a local motorcycle club, known for its rebellious reputation. Their faces were rough, with scars and tattoos that told stories of years spent on the road and in trouble. They had a dangerous air about them, the kind of people who thrived on confrontation and showing dominance wherever they went. The bikers parked their motorcycles close to the soldiers' truck, eyeing them carefully. One of them, a burly man with a thick beard and cold eyes, stepped forward and sneered. He made a loud comment about the soldiers' uniforms, mocking them as government puppets and desk warriors. It was clear from his tone that he didn't respect the soldiers, and he wanted them to know it. The other bikers laughed, circling around David and Mark like wolves sizing up their prey. David took a deep breath and tried to keep his cool. He had faced tougher situations overseas, and knew that picking a fight with a group of aggressive bikers was not a smart move. "We're just here to refuel and grab a quick break," he said calmly, hoping to avoid trouble. "No need for any problems." But the bikers weren't interested in peace. One of them stepped closer to Mark, deliberately bumping into him. Mark nearly spilled his coffee, and before he could react, the biker grabbed the cup and threw it on the ground, spilling hot liquid everywhere. The biker laughed loudly, enjoying the moment. "What's the matter? Can't handle a little fun?" he jeered. Mark's face flushed with anger, but he kept his composure. He looked at David, who gave him a slight nod, an unspoken signal to stay calm. The soldiers had been trained to handle conflict without escalating it unnecessarily, but the bikers were relentless. They began blocking the path to the convenience store entrance, refusing to let the soldiers go inside. Their voices grew louder, filled with insults and crude jokes. More people began to notice the situation. A few customers inside the store peeked out the windows, curious but hesitant to get involved. Some motorists stopped briefly, watching the unfolding drama. The gas station attendant, a middle-aged man named Joe, stepped outside and looked worried. He had seen the bikers cause trouble before and hoped this wouldn't turn violent. One of the bikers, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, moved, even closer to David. "You think you're tough in that uniform? We run this town," he said, his voice low and threatening. He shoved David lightly in the chest, testing his reaction. David didn't flinch. He was trained to control his anger and respond only when necessary. "We don't want any trouble," he said firmly. "Let's all just calm down." But the bikers weren't listening. Fueled by bravado and perhaps a little too much beer, they continued to taunt and intimidate the soldiers. One of them grabbed Mark's phone from his pocket, waving it around like a trophy. "What are you going to do about it, soldier?" he challenged. That was the last straw. David's eyes narrowed. He had been through countless confrontations in his military career. But this was different. This was personal. Not just because they were being disrespected, but because innocent bystanders were starting to get uneasy. If things spiraled out of control, someone could get hurt. Without hesitation, David moved quickly. His body reacted almost instinctively, a skill honed from years of hand-to-hand combat training. He grabbed the biker's wrist and twisted it, forcing him to drop Mark's phone. At the same time, Mark stepped in, using his own training to subdue another biker who was trying to join the fray. What happened next surprised everyone watching. Instead of a chaotic brawl, the soldiers executed their moves with precision and control. They didn't strike with full force to injure. Instead, they used holds and maneuvers designed to immobilize the bikers without causing serious harm. Two of the bikers hit the ground, stunned and unable to get up quickly, while the other two stepped back, clearly shocked at how quickly the soldiers had reacted. The tension in the air changed instantly. The other bikers, who had been cocky and loud just moments before, suddenly looked uncertain. They were not used to being outmatched so easily, especially by men who weren't even on duty. Some people watching started clapping quietly, impressed by the soldiers' professionalism and skill. David and Mark stood their ground, breathing steadily but alert. They made it clear they weren't looking for a fight, but they also weren't going to be pushed around. The bikers, now realizing the situation was no longer in their favor, backed away toward their motorcycles. The gas station fell silent again, except for the occasional murmur from the bystanders. Joe, the attendant, gave David a grateful nod. The soldiers collected their belongings and quickly finished refueling their truck. Before leaving, David looked around to see if anyone needed help or if the situation was truly over. As they drove away, David and Mark talked quietly about what had just happened. They knew they had handled the encounter with discipline and restraint, but the memory of those moments stayed with them. It was a reminder that sometimes, even when off duty, they might have to face danger and stand up for themselves and others. This encounter at a simple gas station became more than just a stop on their journey. It was a moment that tested their patience, courage, and training. Little did they know, it was just the beginning of a story that would spread far beyond that quiet stretch of highway. After the initial tension at the gas station, the atmosphere grew even thicker with unease. What had started as a few rude comments and pushed boundaries quickly became a standoff between two very different groups: off-duty soldiers and a rowdy gang of bikers. The bikers weren't just loud and arrogant, they were testing limits, looking for an excuse to assert dominance. They wanted to show everyone at the gas station, and especially these soldiers, who was in charge. The soldiers, on the other hand, were calm but prepared. They knew how dangerous this kind of situation could become, but they also knew they could not back down or show fear. The soldiers were still close to their vehicle, with Mark clutching what was left of his coffee cup. David's eyes scanned the group of bikers carefully, analyzing every movement, every slight shift in their posture. Years of military training had taught him to read body language quickly. The bikers were not just being loud for fun. They were serious about provoking a reaction. The leader of the bikers, the big bearded man, stepped forward again, his face twisted with a mix of anger and challenge. His words were loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Why don't you soldiers just go back to your little base and leave real people alone?" he sneered. "This isn't your fight." David's jaw tightened, but he held his ground. He spoke calmly, his voice steady. "We're not looking for trouble, just trying to get on our way." That calm didn't work. The bikers grew more aggressive. One of them, the scar-faced man, shoved Mark hard in the chest, The force was enough to knock Mark slightly backward. It wasn't a full attack, but it was a clear message. They weren't going to let the soldiers leave without a fight. The crowd nearby began to take notice now. Inside the convenience store, customers stopped their shopping and watched through the glass windows. Some whispered nervously, unsure whether to step in or stay out. Outside, a few drivers stopped pumping gas and leaned against their vehicles, curious but wary. Mark's eyes flashed with anger, but he didn't respond. David, seeing his partner's restraint, nodded in silent approval. They had been trained to avoid fights when possible and never to lose control, but it was becoming harder to hold back. Suddenly, one of the bikers lunged forward, grabbing Mark's phone from his hand. He waved it tauntingly, as if daring Mark to do something. Mark's fingers twitched, ready to fight back, but David put a hand on his shoulder to stop him. "Wait," David said quietly. The moment was tense. Everyone was holding their breath. The bikers were feeling bold, confident they could intimidate these two soldiers. But David and Mark were not ordinary men. David was a hand-to-hand combat instructor, someone who trained soldiers to handle close fights without weapons. Mark had also been through intense training, having served multiple deployments in dangerous zones. They were both calm, controlled, and ready. Without warning, David made his move. In one smooth motion, he grabbed the biker's wrist holding the phone and twisted it sharply. The biker's grip loosened immediately, and the phone dropped safely to the ground. Mark quickly bent down to pick it up. At the same time, Mark stepped toward another biker who was moving in aggressively. Using a technique taught in military close combat classes, he locked the biker's arm and pushed him gently but firmly away, taking care not to cause injury, but making it clear he wasn't going to be pushed around. The other bikers watched in shock. They had expected the soldiers to back down or fight clumsily. Instead, David and Mark moved with precision and confidence. Their actions were quick, efficient, and without anger, exactly what military training aimed to achieve in dangerous situations. Two of the bikers suddenly found themselves on the ground. They were stunned, not because of harsh blows, but because they were caught off guard by the soldiers' skills. The hold David applied prevented any further attack and left the biker immobilized. Mark's move did the same to his target, who was now standing helplessly with his arm trapped. The remaining two bikers backed away slowly, clearly surprised and unsure of what to do next. The sudden shift in power surprised everyone watching. The bikers, who had been cocky and aggressive just moments before, now looked cautious. They hadn't expected the soldiers to be so well prepared, especially when off duty. The crowd that had gathered around started murmuring among themselves. Some people clapped softly, others nodded in approval. Even Joe, the gas station attendant, looked relieved. He had seen plenty of fights break out here before, and they rarely ended well. This time, however, the soldiers' calm and discipline had prevented a full-scale brawl. David and Mark stood tall, but didn't look for more conflict. Their eyes scanned the area, checking for any other threats or surprises. They kept breathing, evenly, showing no signs of anger or aggression. It was clear they were in control. The bikers, now realizing the situation had turned against them, began to retreat toward their motorcycles. The leader gave David one last hard look, a mixture of anger and respect, before climbing onto his bike and starting the engine. The others followed, their motorcycles roaring loudly as they sped away from the gas station. As the bikers left, David turned to Mark and said quietly, "We did the right thing. We protected ourselves without causing more harm." Mark nodded, still a little shaken but proud. "Yeah, but that could have gone way worse." David smiled faintly. "That's why we train hard, so we're ready when it matters." The customers and bystanders slowly returned to their routines. Some came up to David and Mark, thanking them or just offering a nod of respect. A few even shook their hands, recognizing that the soldiers had handled a dangerous situation with honor and skill. Inside the store, Joe cleaned up the spilled coffee and looked at the soldiers. "You guys did good," he said softly. "Most people wouldn't have kept their heads like you did." David and Mark thanked him but said little. They didn't want attention. They were just glad the situation had ended without serious injuries. As they finished paying for their fuel, David and Mark discussed what to do next. They decided to report the incident to their base's military police, just to make sure there was a record of what happened. It wasn't about punishment. It was about safety and being prepared for anything. The soldiers knew that the bikers might come back, or that word would spread in the local community. But they were ready. They trusted their training and each other. Driving away from the gas station, the sun was almost set, and the road ahead was quiet again. David and Mark were thoughtful, but calm. They had faced a test, and they had passed it without losing who they were. Soldiers who defended not just with strength, but with discipline and respect. That day at the gas station was more than just a simple stop on a long road. It was a reminder that true courage is measured not by how loudly you shout or how hard you hit, but by how you hold yourself when everything is on the line. And for David and Mark, that lesson would stay with them forever. The moment the bikers sped away from the gas station, a wave of relief seemed to sweep over the place, but the tension that had filled the air did not disappear so easily. The few bystanders who had witnessed the confrontation were still processing what had just happened. Some looked amazed, others a little shocked. The whole gas station was buzzing with quiet conversations and whispers. People who had been inside the convenience store peeked out the windows, trying to make sense of the rapid change from a tense standoff to a sudden, controlled end. David and Mark stood near their truck, their breaths slowing as they settled back into calm. The adrenaline that had pumped through their bodies just moments ago began to fade, but the seriousness of the situation remained clear in their minds. Neither of them spoke at first. Instead, they surveyed the area carefully, making sure there were no lingering threats, no surprise attackers hiding nearby. Almost immediately, a few brave onlookers started approaching the soldiers. One man, middle-aged and wearing a worn baseball cap, stepped forward and said quietly, "I'm glad you two handled that the way you did. Those bikers have caused trouble around here before, but nobody stands up to them like that." David gave a polite nod. "We only defended ourselves and tried to avoid any serious fighting." The man smiled faintly. "That's the right way. Not many people have the discipline for that." Meanwhile, inside the convenience store, Joe, the gas station attendant, was busy calling the local police to report the incident. Even though the bikers had left, it was important to have the authorities aware of what had happened, especially in case the bikers tried to return or escalate things further. He explained the situation calmly to the dispatcher, mentioning the soldiers' involvement and the fact that no one appeared seriously injured. Within minutes, the distant sound of sirens cut through the evening air. A police car pulled into the station, its flashing lights reflecting off the gas pumps and casting a blue and red glow over everything. Two officers stepped out, calm and professional, their expressions showing that they took the situation seriously, but had been trained to handle incidents like this without panic. David and Mark approached the officers, ready to give their statements. They explained everything clearly, from the bikers' initial harassment to how they had defended themselves with restraint and skill. The officers listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions to understand every detail. One of the officers recognized the soldiers almost immediately. "Are you from the nearby military base?" he asked. "Yes, sir," David replied. "We just finished training and we're on our way home." The officers nodded, showing respect for their service. They asked to see the security footage from the gas station's cameras. Joe cooperated, quickly bringing up the video feed on the store's monitor. Everyone watched as the confrontation replayed in real time. The bikers arriving, the insults, the spilled coffee, and finally the soldiers' calm but firm response. The video clearly showed that the soldiers did not provoke the bikers and only used force to defend themselves when pushed and threatened. This was an important piece of evidence, especially since the bikers might try to twist the story later. A few customers who had been witnesses came forward to speak with the officers, confirming that the soldiers had acted appropriately and that the bikers had been the aggressors. Their statements helped build a clear picture for the police, making it unlikely that the soldiers would face any charges or trouble. As the officers finished taking the reports, they explained to David and Mark that the bikers had been detained nearby and were being questioned about the incident. They reassured the soldiers that the situation was under control and thanked them for their calm and professional behavior. The police also promised to keep an eye on the area for a few days to prevent any retaliation or further problems. David and Mark appreciated this extra caution. They knew that sometimes people like the bikers could be unpredictable, especially after being publicly embarrassed. Word of the incident started to spread quickly around the town and the military base. Fellow soldiers and friends who heard about the confrontation expressed admiration for how David and Mark had handled themselves. They were praised not just for their physical skill, but for their discipline and restraint. The soldiers themselves stayed humble. They had no interest in making a big deal out of what had happened. For them, it was just another test of their training and character. As the day turned into evening, the media began to catch wind of the story. A local news station contacted the base, wanting to know more about the incident at the gas station. When they learned that the soldiers had acted in self-defense and maintained control without escalating the fight, reporters praised their professionalism. Some of the footage captured by bystanders' phones started appearing on social media. The videos showed the soldiers being pushed and harassed, then calmly and skillfully defending themselves. The clips quickly went viral, shared across veteran groups, local communities, and even national news pages. Veterans from all over the country commented online, expressing respect for David and Mark. Many shared their own stories of facing similar challenges, and the video became a symbol of how training and discipline can help people handle even the toughest situations without losing control. Meanwhile, the motorcycle club that the bikers belonged to was not happy with the attention. The leaders of the club issued a public statement distancing themselves from the 4 bikers involved. They apologized for the disturbance and promised to handle the situation internally. This was a move to protect their reputation and prevent further legal trouble. David and Mark, while surprised by the sudden spotlight, remained grounded. They were invited to appear on a few talk shows and interviews, where they talked about the importance of discipline, training, and knowing when to defend oneself. But they always emphasized that violence was never the goal. For them, strength was about control and respect, not domination. Back at the base, their commanding officer acknowledged their actions as an example of Army values in action. He praised their ability to stay calm under pressure and to protect themselves and others, without unnecessary aggression. However, no formal awards were given. David and Mark preferred to keep the incident quiet, focusing on their duties and not on any personal glory. A local veterans group later sent them a letter of appreciation, along with a special coin engraved, with the words, "Strength through restraint." It was a small gesture, but one that meant a lot. The coin became a symbol of their story and a reminder that sometimes the hardest battles are won by staying calm and controlled. The incident at the gas station left a lasting impression on everyone involved. For David and Mark, it was a powerful lesson in courage and professionalism. For the bikers, it was a harsh reminder that not everyone can be intimidated. And for the community, it was a story of unexpected heroes who chose honor over violence. In the weeks that followed, life returned to normal. The soldiers continued their service with quiet pride, and the gas station went back to being just a stop on the highway. But the story lived on, reminding people that real strength is not about fighting harder or louder. It is about knowing when to stand firm, when to walk away, and how to protect what matters most with dignity. After the dust settled on the incident at the gas station, David and Mark found themselves back at their military base, but the events of that day stayed heavy in their minds. It was not just a simple encounter anymore. It had become a story about discipline, courage, and the power of self-control. Yet the experience also left them thinking deeply about the dangers soldiers might face, even when they are off duty and far from any battlefield. In the days following the confrontation, both men took time to reflect. Mark sat quietly in the barracks, replaying the moment when the biker had shoved him. He could still feel the sharp shock of the impact and the rush of adrenaline that followed. But what impressed him most was how David had immediately reacted. Calmly, without panic, using skill rather than anger to defuse the situation. That was the difference between a soldier and someone who simply fights out of anger. David, on his side, thought about how quickly things could have spiraled out of control. If either of them had lost their temper, or if the bikers had brought weapons, the result could have been much worse. His training had prepared him for combat, but real life was unpredictable, and there was no script to follow. Every second mattered, and every choice could mean the difference between peace and chaos. The military base itself buzzed with news of their bravery. Fellow soldiers admired their ability to stay focused under pressure, especially since they had been off duty and caught completely by surprise. The story inspired many, but it also sparked important conversations about safety outside the base. Officers reminded everyone to stay alert, even when off duty, and to always have a plan for self-defense. The leadership decided to hold a special briefing for all soldiers. In this meeting, David and Mark were invited to share their experience, not to boast, but to teach. They explained how discipline and training helped them, and how crucial it was to stay calm even when faced with provocation. Their message was simple but powerful. Strength is useless without control. The training staff also updated their self-defense programs to include lessons learned from the incident. They emphasized situational awareness, the importance of reading, body language, and using nonviolent techniques to avoid fights when possible. David and Mark helped design scenarios where soldiers could practice managing confrontations without escalating violence. Meanwhile, on the civilian side of things, the gas station manager took steps to improve safety at the station. He installed better lighting, upgraded the security cameras, and even hired a security guard for night shifts. He wanted to prevent similar incidents and protect both customers and staff. Joe, the attendant, felt safer too, knowing the place was now better prepared. The local police department also increased patrols near the gas station and surrounding areas. They worked closely with the military base, sharing information about possible threats. The cooperation helped build trust between the community and the soldiers, who were often seen as outsiders, but not everyone was happy about the increased attention. The biker gang, embarrassed by their public defeat, began to whisper threats and make plans. Some members tried to contact David and Mark through friends, warning them to stay away from their territory. The soldiers knew these threats were serious, but they refused to be intimidated. They remained vigilant, always ready but unwilling to start unnecessary conflict. One evening, a week after the gas station incident, David and Mark received a call from their commanding officer. The officer invited them to a private meeting. When they arrived, they found a group of senior officers waiting. The mood was serious. The commanding officer explained that while their actions at the gas station were commendable, the military had to think about the bigger picture. There were concerns that such public confrontations could lead to negative publicity or unwanted retaliation. The base wanted to make sure soldiers stayed safe, but also maintained good relations with the local community. David and Mark listened carefully. They agreed with the need for caution, but emphasized that they had no intention of backing down from protecting themselves or others. The conversation ended with plans to work together on community outreach programs to improve understanding between soldiers and civilians. As part of these efforts, David and Mark began volunteering to visit local schools and community centers. They talked openly about their military experience, the importance of respect, and how misunderstandings could escalate quickly. Their honesty and approachability helped break down barriers. People began to see soldiers not just as distant figures in uniform, but as neighbors and friends. One afternoon, during one of these visits, a group of teenagers approached David and Mark after the talk. They asked many questions, curious about the soldiers' lives and the incident at the gas station. The soldiers answered patiently, sharing stories without exaggeration. The teenagers listened closely, some nodding in respect. A few even admitted they had thought soldiers were tough and scary, but now they saw them as disciplined and honorable. This outreach was important not only for the community, but also for David and Mark. It gave them a sense of purpose beyond their military duties. They realized that their role as soldiers included being ambassadors of peace and understanding, especially in times when tensions ran high. Back at the base, David and Mark also focused on their physical and mental health. The incident had been stressful, and they knew it was essential to take care of themselves. They attended counseling sessions offered by the military, which helped them process the experience and manage any lingering anxiety. They also supported each other as friends. Late at night, they would talk about what had happened, sharing thoughts and feelings. These conversations strengthened their bond, reminding them that they were not alone in facing challenges. In training, both men became role models. Younger soldiers looked up to them, not just for their fighting skills but for their calm leadership and ability to handle pressure. David and Mark encouraged their peers to focus on discipline and respect, teaching that courage meant controlling emotions and thinking clearly. The base organized several team-building exercises, many designed to simulate high-stress situations. David and Mark helped lead these, sharing tips on how to stay calm and act responsibly. Their experience made the drills more realistic and valuable. Despite the increased attention, life was not always easy. The occasional threat from the biker gang still lingered like a shadow. One night, Mark noticed a group of strangers loitering near the base entrance. They looked tough, wearing leather jackets and riding motorcycles similar to the ones from the gas station. Mark reported the sighting immediately, and security tightened patrols. The base took no chances. They reinforced their perimeter and reminded soldiers to stay vigilant, especially when off-duty. David and Mark took extra precautions too, always, watching their surroundings carefully. One weekend, while off base and enjoying a rare day off, David and Mark decided to visit a nearby park to relax. They noticed a small group of bikers in the distance, but this time the bikers did not approach or cause trouble. The soldiers stayed calm, keeping a respectful distance and enjoying the fresh air. This moment felt like a small victory, a sign that tensions could ease if both sides chose peace over conflict. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest strength was in walking away and showing respect, even to those who might not always deserve it. In the following months, the incident at the gas station slowly faded from headlines, but its lessons remained alive. David and Mark continued their service with quiet determination, always prepared but focused on building bridges rather than walls. Their story became part of the base's history, a powerful example of what true soldiers could be: discipline and courage wrapped in respect and honor. And though the world around them was sometimes unpredictable and dangerous, they knew that their greatest strength lay not just in weapons or muscles, but in their minds and hearts. Through it all, David and Mark learned that real victory was not in fighting harder or winning battles, but in standing firm for what was right and showing courage even when no one was watching. Their journey was a reminder that every soldier carries not just a weapon, but a responsibility to protect, to serve, and to lead with integrity.